So, Tyree is a tough act to follow, and thank you for the nice introduction. One of the things that people are really curious about is what other people are thinking. In fact, a 2011 poll of Americans, which asked them which superpower they'd most like to have, found that the ability to mind read was tied at the top of the list with the ability to time travel. But to some extent, everyday mind reading doesn't require any superpowers. It's really more of a mundane activity that I bet many of you have already done this morning. And what's more, psychology research suggests that your guesses about what other people were thinking were probably more accurate than chance. So all this curiosity about what other people are thinking, this sounds like a really good idea, because it should lead us to diversity of perspectives other than our own. And if we can more accurately guess what other people are thinking, surely that will lead to greater understanding between people, right? Well, we're better at chance at guessing what other people are thinking. But like any student who's made a D on a true-false test can tell you, being better than chance doesn't mean you're so good. And it turns out, just like the theme of today's talks, there's some resistance along with all that curiosity about other people's thoughts. So that is resistance to being entirely open-minded when it comes to trying to understand the contents of other people's minds. So too often the question, what were you thinking, becomes, what were you thinking? Implying that not only does the questioner already have some idea about what the other person was thinking, but they've passed judgment on it as well. Now, to be fair, some of this resistance to open-minded mind reading is not willful or intentional. And part of it's just the nature of the task. So if you look at the current model of Homo sapiens, that's our species, you'll notice that there's a lack of thought receptors. We don't have any antenna. We don't have any X-ray vision. And in fact, there's not even an iPhone app yet that's going to allow us to access the content of other people's minds. So it turns out that this mind reading thing is not really reading at all. Mind reading turns out to be more of a construction project. You're building a guess of what the contents of somebody else's mind is. So when we do that, building that, we have some cues we can use. What are some of them? Well, some of them commonly go by the term body language. And indeed, we are pretty good at reading people's emotions from their facial and bodily expressions. But just if you know what emotion somebody's feeling, that doesn't mean you know what they're thinking. So look at these guys here, particularly the guy on the left. Now you can read his body language. Clearly he is surprised. He is shocked. But do we know what he's thinking? Is he thinking, holy cow, where did that guy in the white jersey come from to beat me? Or is he thinking, oh my God, I've just come from behind to place in this race and earn a spot on the US Olympic team? In this case, it was actually the latter. Now, if you have any questions about or curiosity about how difficult it is to communicate via body language, just try using it alone for a day, no real language. And you'll see it's a pretty impoverished medium when it comes to communicating. Excuse me. So it's not surprising, I think, that it's really the verbal cues that are going to be really important in knowing what other people are thinking. What people tell us is going to be very valuable in terms of knowing what they're thinking. And this is a point that I'll return to later. Now, of course, people don't always come right out and tell us what they're thinking. So what are some of the other cues we can use to guessing their thoughts? Well, we can use knowledge that we already have, other knowledge that we have. So if we're trying to guess the thoughts of a particular person, someone who we know, we can use that knowledge that we know about those other people to guess their thoughts. So imagine you're out to dinner with your friend who's a vegetarian and the server comes by and says, tonight's special is a steak. You can imagine what your friend is thinking. But what if we don't know the other person at all? We might still be able to construct an accurate guess about what they're thinking by using what we know about other people. Now, Dan Ames, who's a social psychologist at the Columbia Business School, has noted that in our mind-reading toolbox, we have two very important tools for when it comes to reading the thoughts of strangers. And one of them is actually ourselves. One strategy for guessing what other people are thinking is to think, well, what would I be thinking? Dan Ames' work has also shown us that we're particularly likely to assume that other people are thinking the same thing we are when we perceive those other people as similar to us. But does that perceived similarity actually result in more accurate mind reading? This is a question that I've looked at in my own research, and in particular I'm interested in the question of whether having a particular life event will make you better at reading the thoughts or the minds of other people who've been through similar experiences. So if I'm a new mom and you're a new mom, then I'll be better able to understand your thoughts. Or if I'm a college student who's had divorced parents and you're a college student with divorced parents, then I'll understand what you're going through. right? Well, except we've been unable to find any evidence of this experience advantage when it comes to mind reading accuracy. And the experiences that I mentioned, becoming a new mother or having your parents get divorced when you're a college student, these are two that we've actually used in our research. And what you're looking at here in this bar graph are accuracy scores. So this is how closely our participants' guesses about what a target person was thinking matched up with what that target person actually said they were thinking. And in this case, we were looking at how accurate college students who either had experienced parental divorce or had not experienced parental divorce, how accurate they were at guessing the thoughts of other college students who had experienced parental divorce. And what you can see is the experience advantage is totally flat. It doesn't give you any advantage to have gone through the experience yourself when it comes to guessing the thoughts of other people who've had similar experiences. However, interestingly, what we found was that the targets in our studies, now these are the people whose thoughts were being read, they did feel better understood when they interacted with other people who they perceived as having similar experiences to them. And this was the case even if they mistakenly believed that those other people had experiences similar to theirs. And I think this shows that there's still a benefit of establishing similarity and connection in terms of helping people to feel more understood, even if similarity doesn't lead to greater mind reading accuracy. Okay, but what about when we don't think people are similar to us? Then Dan Ames tells us that instead of thinking about ourselves when we're trying to guess what other people are thinking, then we might resort to stereotypes. So if you're a new mother and I'm not a new mother, then I may still have some ideas about what you're thinking because I have a stereotype about what it's like to have a new baby. You all can probably tell me, what are some of the stereotypic thoughts that new mothers are thinking? I'm tired. I'm so tired. My baby is adorable. I don't have any time with my husband anymore. Okay? So stereotypes get a bad rap. Preconceived, oversimplified ideas. This is not sounding good. But can stereotypic guesses make us more accurate mind readers? Here's a graph from one of our studies where we were looking at people's ability to guess the thoughts of new mothers. And what we found was that the more stereotypic the participants' guesses were about what the new mother was thinking, the more accurate they were at guessing her thoughts. So that is, they were guessing things like, exactly like you all said, she's thinking about how tired she is. Bingo! All right. We found the same pattern of results when we looked at guesses about the thoughts of college students who were thinking about their parents getting divorced. Now here, the stereotypic guesses were things like, he wishes his parents were still together. These, again, they were more accurate. So, as part of a series of talks on diversity, am I challenging the stereotype about stereotypes? Hear me out. Okay, first of all, one thing that's really important is in the case of new mothers and college students, the stereotypes are true. We do know what they're thinking. New moms do think about a lot about how tired they are, and college students do think a lot about how hard it was to grow up in two different households. We know this because part of doing this research requires that we go out and gather these people's thoughts. We have to ask them about these experiences. What were you thinking? Now contrast this with stereotypes that are historically biased or perpetuated in the interest of marginalizing some groups. If stereotypes that are wrong, they're not going to help us be more accurate in inferring other people's thoughts. Instead, what we're talking about here is that if you know something about a group's experiences in general, and this could be knowledge that you get from interacting with and learning about diverse groups of people, you may have an advantage in reading their thoughts. So general knowledge of a group is probably not going to allow you to score a bullseye in guessing a particular person's thoughts, a member of that group, but it may help you get a little closer to the target. Now also, keep in mind that the participants in our studies, just like real people everywhere, were bringing to mind whatever information they could to guess the thoughts of a stranger. Now some of those ideas may have been preconceived and oversimplified, but in this case, they were based on valid information, which, when guessing the thoughts of strangers, may be better than nothing. Because remember the problem, there are no thought receptors. All right? When we're trying to guess another person's thoughts, we're forced into the construction business. Or are we? Remember how important I said verbal cues were in knowing what somebody else is thinking? Well, it turns out there's a really simple way to get really good information about what another person is thinking. And that's simply to ask them. All right? What were you thinking? One very good reason we've probably not evolved to have those crazy thought receptors is that because we already have a really highly developed system for sharing our thoughts with other people, and it's called language. Now, we may not always be willing to share our thoughts verbally, and under some circumstances, that's probably a good thing, and that's a talk for another day. But for now, when you're curious what somebody else is thinking, don't assume that they're thinking the same thing as you, or that they're thinking the same thing as everyone else. Expose yourself to some diversity of thought, and ask them. Thanks.